Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
To our panelists and to the audience that's viewing us. This is the first in a series of planned innovation policy dialogues that we intend to have, where we're going to examine the different aspects of the Nigerian innovation system. Today, we're starting with a very germane topic, that of cultivating university-industry collaboration within the Nigerian economy. And there is absolutely no time that is as apt as the period we are in, given the current challenges that the entire global economy is facing with the COVID-19 pandemic and the attendant disruptions that has brought on global supply chains. In Nigeria, we also have the additional complication of a massive reduction the volume of foreign exchange earnings due to how oil prices have crashed. And that tells us that a lot of the things we used to import, we will no longer be able to import all of them, which again emphasizes the need for us to have some collaboration where we can begin to develop alternative sources locally. So as we're about to start the conversation on the Triple Helix platform, I'd like to introduce our panelists to you. First, we have Dr. Suleiman Ramon Yusuf, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the National Universities Commission. He is representing the Executive Secretary, Professor Abubakar Adamu Rashid, who is unavoidably absent today. Dr. Ramon Yusuf, you're welcome.
Good morning, thank you.
We have Engineer Mansour Ahmed with us. He's the president of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. So when we talk industry, that's the core in terms of how production, local manufacturing occurs, and it's interesting to begin to align perspectives between our manufacturers and the research community in the university system. Engineer Mansour, we welcome you today. Excellent. Thank you, sir. We also have with us Professor Will Cardwell. He's an American based in Finland and is quite a hybrid character, an academic who went on to establish a successful venture capital fund called Courage Funds, where he's currently managing partner. And he used to be the managing director of Technopolis PLC, which has something to do with an example that he can share with us of university and business collaboration from the Finnish perspective, because Technopolis builds office space around university locations. So we'll be interested in hearing about how Finland has been able to develop the UIC engagement. Professor Cardwell, welcome you.
Thank you. Look forward to talking to you guys.
Thank you. Then we also have with us Professor Giorgio De Toni. He's the director of the Center for Ethical Mining at the University of São Paulo in Brazil. We will be hearing from him the Brazilian perspective in terms of how they've developed and the many dimensions that university-industry collaboration has taken in Brazil. Giorgio, you're welcome today.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and share some ideas with the group. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we then have Mr. Arno Meerman, the founder of the University Industry Innovation Network based in Amsterdam at the Science Park in Amsterdam, but with global operations, I think 350 institutional members across the globe, and quite a history of engaging at systemic levels on studying the nature of university-industry collaboration in different countries. Arno, we welcome you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tope. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to this webinar for the next 2 hours, talking about a topic that's very dear and to me, and which I'm very passionate about.
Excellent. So I want to apologize ahead. We were supposed to have Professor Enase Okonedo, the Dean of Lagos Business School. Unfortunately, there was a mix-up in the communication and some scheduling difficulties, and she is unable to join us. That also, the apology is double-edged, that she couldn't make it after we had said she was going to be here is one, and secondly, that we have a panel that is all male. That wasn't the intention, so we apologize ahead for that as well. This program is an initiative of the Triple Helix Roundtable, which has been formed in Nigeria by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, the National Universities Commission, and the Tertiary Education Trust Fund in Nigeria. So it's the beginning of building a formal platform for collaboration between academia and industry and involving government. And the ultimate aim is to arrive at destination innovation development in Nigeria. So as we go into the conversation, I will invite opening statements from the panelists, and the statements are going to be tilted in specific directions so we can get a balanced view of the conversation that we're about to have. So Dr. Ramon Yusuf, I will start with you. Can you give us an overview of the NUC's current activities in terms of engagement with industry?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tope. Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to see you and interact with you on this very important issue. Now, for us at the National Universities Commission, we hold very dearly the newfound relationship that we have so far been able to forge with the industry led by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. The Executive Secretary of the AUC, Professor Abubakar Adamu Rashid, has been a true leader in the sense of galvanizing action to enable the universities and industry bridge the traditional gap, which has been found to be very unhelpful. Now, so this for us is a very exciting development, and we are beginning to see some of the fruits, numerous fruits, which of course is exemplified by today's webinar. Now, so for us, we have in a very short time overcome the blame game, traditional blame game between industry and academia. Oh, your products are not good enough for industry. Oh, you guys just stand aloof and complain about our products, and so on and so forth. And while all of this bickering has been going on, the nation has been the loser. So for us at NUC, the timing cannot be better because we are deep into the process of transformation of the Nigerian system through our blueprint for the rapid revitalization of university education. So to find useful partners such as the NESG and the entire industrial group is very heartening to us. And we're very optimistic that from the steps we are taking, the baby steps we are taking so far, our destination of forging a productive linkage between the academia and industry with total support from government is very exciting to us, and the omen is very good for prospects going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Ramon Yusuf. So, Engineer Mansour, My request right now is for you to speak to the current situation we are in based on the background that I've painted. So we have this COVID-19 pandemic with disruptions to global supply chains and a possible paucity of foreign exchange for importation of raw materials. What will our manufacturers require from the academic community in Nigeria to be able to overcome these challenges?
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think this particular crisis we're facing of the coronavirus has essentially highlighted the three major weaknesses of the research industry partnership ecosystem. First of all, we have found ourselves in a situation where our manufacturing capacity can simply not meet even the basic requirement of addressing this pandemic. Even though, of course, we do realize that this is the same in most other countries, even in the larger and more established economies. But I think our problem is different. I think in other economies, the problem is one of the volume of production. In our case, the problem is the productive capacity itself, that we are not even in a position to produce even the basic elements. When this COVID became obvious, say from around the beginning of February, we 3,000 members under the Nigerian manufacturing.
Looks like we lost Engineer Mansour there. Can you hear me, sir? Okay. So while we're waiting to bring him back online, I will proceed to, and we'll take the view he has, the proposition he has made. We'll still open it up some, but let me now ask Professor Cardwell. The conversation today is really not at an institutional level. We want a systemic intervention first. It's not as if in Nigeria there haven't been examples of university-industry collaboration. And they seem to be few and far in between. I recall that University of Port Harcourt has an Institute of Petroleum Engineering also that is the result of industry collaboration with the university. But we've not replicated that in many other places. I also recall that we have had in the past, I see that we have Engineer Mansour back. So I'll come back to you, Professor Cardwell. Let's have Engineer Mansour conclude what he was talking to us about. So Engineer Mansour, sir, we lost you. Please proceed. We can't hear you, sir. Engineer Mansour. Okay, while we wait to resolve that, that's the second time, let me continue with what I was asking Will. So some years ago, there was collaboration between one of our universities as well, I think Ahmadu Bello University, and some brewing firms to develop a sorghum variant that can be used to replace, I think it was barley in the making of beer and some other drinks. Why haven't we sort of evolved this into an intervention that can happen at scale and across board between operators in different sectors and researchers in different sectors? I am mindful that research is not the only aspect of collaboration between universities and industry, and often it is not also recommended as the first step. But here we are today with COVID-19, it is the clear and present need that we have. So from the Finnish experience, what can we learn of how do we aggregate all of these pockets and build a system that can develop and cut across different segments? Will, can we take your viewpoint?
Okay, that's fine. So can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Okay. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this prestigious group. It was a pleasure to host you guys in Helsinki a year or so ago. So that was kind of my first exposure to the Nigerian situation, though I've spent time in other parts of Africa. I've lived here in Finland for 26 years, as said, American kind of transplant. And I think Finland is an interesting case kind of globally. Finland had one of the worst hit economies in the late 80s, early 90s kind of financial crisis. It took Finland many years to bounce back. And I'd like to maybe point to what was done there that kind of catalyzed what I would call what's been rated as a quite resilient economy today. So I think, so first of all, it is there's the triple helix is a very relevant concept. And I do think to kick the triple helix into gear, the government is absolutely critical. In Finland, the government overinvested in several universities and research centers to build up, to kind of help build expertise that made them attractive to the local industries to start then doing contract research with. So, and I would use that word overinvested. It was not just investing, but it was actually probably investing more than most of society really wanted them to. But it turned out what it did is built a few strongholds within all the universities that began being attractive partners to industry, in particular pulp and paper industry here in Finland, telco industry, to a certain extent kind of health and safety. So I think government kickstarting and choosing, picking and choosing the best of the best that you have and lifting them up is the only way to do it. In other words, you can't really just spread everything equally and hope that, you'll grow a lot of strongholds. I feel that you probably already have existing strongholds, find ways to really boost those up. That's certainly what worked here. And then to the point, you pointed out an example, I think, valorization of the successful cases is super important. And, in Finland, one of the cases, the kind of the early data traffic in mobile networks was pioneered in Finland. In university, kind of a combination of Nokia, the university, and the telcos here. So finding those kind of cases that kind of shine a light for the others. And I have some, I'll stop here at this point. I have some other kind of case studies when I was running the tech transfer department that I'll bring a little bit later. But if that's a start, let's stop there.
Okay. So if I hear you correctly, the starting point for us should be to identify some of the strong performers. Those will be universities, for instance, pick universities, support them massively in building this engagement, and let others learn from them.
Yeah, and actually, another kind of thing I would add to that is highlight people. So, you know, some people say, okay, you might say this university is good at this, this university is good at this. Universities, the research in engineering and technology and science, it's all about people, right? So make sure that you identify the, you know, within the right institutions, the people that you will kind of choose to be the standard bearers. That's again, and you know, I'm not saying, you know, make them millionaires or anything like that, but give them the resources to build out their research groups. You know, scientists, technologists are driven by, you know, the impact they can make. And so if you give them if you can successfully get them resources and then set the right metrics to track those, I think you can get some great successes.
Excellent, thank you. So Giorgio, Brazil, you know, the thing about this conversation is we are blending the perspective. So Finland is an advanced economy, it's an OECD top player. But Brazil is a developing economy like Nigeria, same population size, 200 million people. But Nigeria is sitting at a GDP of $400 billion, while Brazil is at $2 trillion. And I think where you are in Sao Paulo, the GDP of Sao Paulo is about 800 or 900 billion dollars. That's even higher than what we have. You've also recorded successes in agriculture, in mining, in the oil industry. I think Brazil is reputed to be one of the leaders in terms of subsea technology for oil drilling. And the whole world celebrates the Brazilian success with Embraer. How did Brazil get here? And I asked that question, framing it in the context of what did universities, Brazilian universities, contribute to that process at a systemic level that now gave rise to all of the industrial giants and successes that Brazil has enjoyed? Giorgio.
Okay, now I agree. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm in São Paulo, in Brazil. I'm a mining engineer, and I work at the University of São Paulo. Okay, you are correct. Brazil has many similarities with Nigeria. They are both resource-rich nations, but that have a number of sustainable development challenges for the society. Okay, Brazil is a very large country. São Paulo, as a niche, has been able to develop a focus on industrialization over many decades ago. Okay, and maybe because of that, we were able to mature the relationship between government, industry, and of course the support required by research centers and universities. Okay, I will be talking a little bit about our very recent experience of setting up an exchange program for Nigerian scholars coming to São Paulo to learn a little bit about the way we are working in the relationship, the triple helix relationship, and what works and what should also be improved for the future. This program, I want to talk a little bit about this program because it's an important example for us, right? It has been set up by PTDF in Nigeria with guidance from Professor Ayo Ajay from FUTA in Nigeria, and he has spent some time in Brazil and some time in São Paulo as well. So he has encouraged PTDF to set up this exchange program, and we are starting to see results in that sense. So during the discussion here, I expect to share a little bit about the experience and also the challenges we are experiencing here in Brazil, and in particular in São Paulo, to build a very solid ecosystem, innovation ecosystem, okay? Innovation relationship that involves the government, the research institutes, and in the industry as well. Each one have responsibilities and have to deliver results, okay? So in the concept is good, but to make it work is not simple and requires a lot of commitment from all these parties, okay?
The next question that I will come back to ask you on is about these challenges of building the innovation ecosystem in São Paulo. So please put some thought to that. It would be good to hear about how you are going about it, what the successes have been, and the challenges that you are facing, because we can learn from that. That's what we are beginning to start doing now, as you can see. Before I call Anu, let's go back to Engineer Mansour. I want him to finish the thought, the explanation he was giving us. So, Engineer Mansour, are you ready for us now?
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me.
Okay.
You can hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, yes. Well, as I was saying, I think the ecosystem that should drive academia, research institute, government, and industry collaboration, particularly with regards to translating research and development into actual production, clearly is different in Nigeria than it is perhaps from Brazil, where they have, like Dr. Jojo said, a more mature industry. Now, we must look at the type of industry we have and the type of research activities that have been going on in the past. First of all, our industry can be broken basically into three major segments. The first, of course, are the subsidiaries of large industries that are based outside the country, the oil industry, for instance, initially. And of course, the more mature manufacturing industries that are actually operating here, but are essentially based abroad. So much of the research they need to do is done abroad. And it's the same thing with the oil industry. Then the second tier are the perhaps new, bigger, but still largely domestic industries that are focused on the final link of the value chain. For instance, the food processes that actually basically do the final processing and then packaging and so on. Now, these industries do very little research, and because most of the research requirement will be done upstream, if you like, on the value chain. The last one, of course, are the small coming up industries.
We seem to have lost Engineer Mansour again. I think he's having challenges with access. So I will now go to Arno, but we still need to come back to hear what he's saying. Maybe I will advise him to switch off, to stop the video so we can hear him more clearly. Okay, he's back. Engineer Mansour, if you can hear me, can you please maybe turn off your video? Then
yes, and then
exactly.
Okay, can you hear me now? The video
Yes.
is okay. So most research, therefore, is funded by government through the various research institutions and through limited grants to universities. Now, at the university level, most of this research is basically largely driven by the needs of the academia. And to a large extent, therefore, it's not often easy for industry to pick that research immediately and convert it into basic productive activity. On the other hand, research done by government research institutions, again, first of all, is largely driven by the, perhaps to a large extent, the intention of those institutions to perhaps produce perhaps goods and services that are intended to substitute for research done elsewhere. Again, these are mostly not adequately funded, and there's a huge gap between what comes out of these research institutions in terms of, if you like, viability and what can be used in industry. And where therefore industry does not have the capacity in terms of the funding to fund the development work that is necessary to convert the very wonderful ideas sometimes into finished productive capacity, then you have a gap. This research work is done and left at the research institutions, and it doesn't cross to the industry. So these are some of the challenges I think that have made it difficult for the industry to actually make the research work being done in research institutions and universities to be easily translated into industrial production. Apart from the fact that particularly with regards to engineering research, there is also the problem of competition. Now, yes, you can pick a good equipment that is produced, a good equipment idea that is produced by research in universities and in our research institutions, and develop it into an equipment that you can use in your industry. But then, will you be competitive in doing that? Is it not likely to be cheaper for you to import the finished product and then use it? So we don't have a capacity, a manufacturing sector that produces, for instance, capital goods. And to a large extent, it is within that kind of sector that a lot of research work becomes very, very easy to build into industrial activity. So my conclusion really, if I can do this quickly, is to say that the ecosystem for both industrial activity and the academic as well as institutional, I'll call the government funded research, institutional research, is not currently level. And I think that is why this triple helix initiative is extremely important, because I think there is need for all sectors, both government, academia, as well as industry, to be innovative in deciding and in finding ways in which we can actually begin to switch what we do at these various institutions, what we do in government research institutions, what we do in academia, into what is doable and what is feasible in industry. Let me give you a good example. In the last 6 weeks or so, since this COVID thing started, we have seen effort by both academic institutions, universities, as well as public sector research institutions to develop, for instance, things like ventilators and sanitizers and things like that. And this is very, very worthwhile, provided we now recognize that, yes, if we start from a ventilator developed by a university or a research institution, to move it into industry will require significant additional investment that perhaps the private sector health care industry may not be able to do on the basis of an investment that will be required to meet the basic commercial conditions. But I think with support from government, that is quite feasible. this is where government initiative in supporting not just the initial development of the ideas, but also the conversion from research into productive output will have to rely on government. And I believe that these are some of the issues that we need to discuss and explore in this triple helix arrangement.
Thank you very much, Engineer Mansour. What you've done quickly is to address a complaint that we hear regularly from those in academia, that we've done research, we've produced this prototype. It's only that the industry are not coming. And they occasionally say only those greedy industry people, they are not coming. But you are pointing to challenges in funding, you are pointing to the lack of competitiveness for the final product, you are pointing to the lack of government support. And if I hear you clearly, all this says that there isn't sufficient communication in terms of what is being developed. The research that people focus on, you said it's based on what the academia is interested in, not particularly the need of industry. So when we come back to Will Cardwell and Giorgio, I want you to talk to us about rolling out this ecosystem development and share perspectives that you may have witnessed in the or experienced in the contexts where you work that sounds similar to the problems Engineer Mansour just shared with us now. If Brazil must have gone through a similar experience before industry became mature, and some of the challenges you are currently facing that may also relate to some of the things Engineer Mansour shared. It would be good to hear your perspective on that, and that for Will as well. So Arno, let's come to you. You don't represent any particular country. You are all about university-industry collaboration globally. So from everything you've heard, which country cases sound similar from a development perspective, and how did they go about solving those problems? Where we are at now is that we have pockets of activities going on. We've not coalesced them. We've not built a system, and we've not been able to grow this system into a formal structure. So from both developing country perspectives and developed economy perspectives, some of the reviews you've carried out, can you share some illustrations at system levels with us that can shed light on how we can go about solving these problems? And over to you.
Yeah, happy to. Maybe I can first pick up a few points of Engineer Mansour's last items, and I especially want to come back to his phrase of be innovative and also to the ability to compete. I think if we look at the picture that he's drawn in terms of the Nigerian industry and the different types of representatives in your sector, then I think we need to have a broader discussion, not just focused on research, but we should especially talk about skills, people, the right mindset, and picking up on something that Giorgio said, maybe experience and exchange programs, because I believe what is necessary in order to set up an ecosystem is you require the top-down support from, for example, government. Maybe often that takes place in terms of either policy commitments, in terms of the metrics for our institutions, but it also comes down, of course, to finances. But you need to build it from the bottom up. So you need to build the capacity amongst the students as well as the academics. It starts with those people, and it starts with giving them the right mindset. I think it's unrealistic to assume that from a research perspective, it would immediately be possible to compete with some of the elite institutions across the globe. So what might be interesting is looking at the domestic market and what can we do and start small and look at what kind of initiatives we can start there. And those initiatives can not only be started by our academics, but they can also be started by students. If they have the right mindset, they might become employers themselves by starting their own entities, but it definitely did become more employable. Picking up something that William said, lighthouse examples is a term I always like to use. And I think that's particularly has been the case in Finland. And it's about that recognition. He mentioned that already earlier. It's about recognizing who is doing an excellent job and praising those people and awarding them for doing it. If it's individuals, if it's institutions, regardless on which level. But only when we see what those people gain and what they get, and we show the appreciation for it, and we see the possibilities, the doors that all of a sudden open to them, only then other people will be motivated and inspired to follow their example. So we need leaders, we need people to lead in this area. And that comes down to building capacity, as William already pointed out. That comes down to building capacity among some of the excellent researchers. So rather than following a funding principle where we spread the money across all the universities, we should really look at who should we give a large portion of finances to in order to really enable them to do something amazing. Because once we have those people in place, they can lead and other people will follow their example. You asked about a few examples from a global perspective. It's really hard, I think, to compare any country to any other country. It's like comparing apples and pears. And I think what is maybe more interesting is cherry picking. So if I would maybe say, maybe I could start with what not to do, that's maybe focus on technology transfer and research alone. Technology transfer is, to me, an endeavor that only leads to the protection of knowledge that can maybe then no longer be used externally. And it definitely is not a commercial model that leads to income and profits for the universities. Those should come from other sources. I don't think that there's many universities across the globe that make a profit on their technology transfer office, if they have one. And there's definitely not a lot of universities that make a profit in general on the patents that they register. Yes, there's a few other examples. There's a few examples if we look at the US, but if we're talking about maybe the top 15, top 20 universities. The other 3,880 universities are either breaking even, maybe making a small profit, but they're looking for maybe 1 in a million shots. I wonder what William's perspective is on this, given his background in venture capital. But also maybe from a Technopolis perspective and the work they have done from a policy perspective, I believe there's some excellent things that we can learn from policies being developed in Europe. When it comes to incentivizing our institutions, it comes down to aligning the metrics to what we actually want them to achieve. So maybe we shouldn't look at the paper publications that they do, the amount of theses that they supervise or their teaching hours. Maybe we should look at how many startups have they created. Are those startups viable? How long have they been around for? What's the turnover that they make? What's in the end the contribution the university makes to the GDP? I'll stop there and then continue later with a few case studies. Sorry, Giorgio.
Sorry to interrupt, but patents as well, of course.
Patents, yes, okay. But Anu, let me quickly ask a follow-up question, and then I will come to Dr. Ramon Yusuf. So that follow-up question is simple. For the benefit of our university administrators who are viewing and who will still view the recorded version, if they are not looking at these patents as a place where profit should come from, if they are not looking at research as generating profit, so what's their motivation for undertaking research and engaging with industry and looking at things around technology transfer? Why should they be motivated to do those things?
I think that has a very simple answer, and it's almost a counter question, which I'll answer myself though. What is the role of a university? What are universities here for? They're here to, let's start with education. That's something that a lot of universities across the globe have fortunately understood very well. They're here to educate talent, either young talent in terms of students, but especially today in an age of lifelong learning, also future current professionals. throughout their entire lifetime. So it's education. And yes, they're there to research. But if we look at the average university, then out of every dollar that they invest, or every euro, whatever currency you want to take, 30% of the funding of research has to come from education. So research itself is barely ever profitable unless you hit that 1 in a million chance that you invent the next Google or whatever other kinds of examples that some universities look at. Or if you're a university that does a lot of work in, for example, pharma or in engineering, there's of course a few particular areas, but that requires excellent research. So let's just break it down. Like, why are universities actually here? They're here to educate and they're here to contribute to our society. Tope, in an earlier call, you've told me about the demographics of the universities in Nigeria. And I think if you look at the number of public institutions, those institutions have a responsibility to the people, given that they're publicly funded, to make sure that they contribute to what the country needs. If that's in terms of GDP financially, but also a social contribution. So I think that's what in the end comes down to, not about making money.
Excellent, thank you very much. So Dr. Ramon Yusuf, I would like you to respond to a few things now that have been shared, and I want to piece them together. So we have heard from Professor Will Cardwell, that where we start from is first the institution. We select some institution, and I think that has to do with things around profiling, profile their areas of strength. And then we also then look at the individuals within those institutions who are succeeding, and we support them a lot more. We pay more attention to them. Ando referenced that when he mentioned capacity development. I think that would be to build up the research teams and the people around those institutions. Also, when Engineer Mansour was speaking, he pointed to challenges that essentially seemed to germinate from the lack of ongoing conversations. And I think there's something about university-industry collaboration that requires a long-term perspective. It boils down to a person. You build relationships and you cultivate those relationships. So that would address the kind of challenges where we don't just end up with a prototype and nobody is interested. When we look at the institutions, what is the structure existing in Nigerian universities to support this process of technology transfer? Who in the system is responsible for overseeing this process? Who is responsible for even setting research priorities that are maybe tied to these are the problems we have? How many of our public universities have these technology transfer offices in place? Who is responsible for cultivating relationships with industry to facilitate those conversations and knowledge sharing? What is the structure like at the level of our institutions? Can you please shed some light on that for us? Sorry, we can't hear you, Dr. Ramon Yusuf. Hearing you yet.
Yeah, okay, I think I was muted. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Okay, I was saying that you have posed so many questions at once, which is fine. I would just like to start by saying that in our context, we need to have a common understanding of what industry means. Because going by what Engineer Mansour himself indicated, the larger industries in their home countries. That is not to say that there is no notion of industry. Nigeria is driven largely by SMEs. So if you take universities as institutions that are expected to make impact, sometimes starting from their immediate communities, they don't need to have a huge industrial complex before they can be relevant. So if charity begins at home and each university is able to impact positively on its immediate community, which may be a few cottage industries, that would be a good point to start from. That's my first remark. Now, the other one is that you cannot convert research results to goods and services if they were not ab initio. The project itself was not ab initio intended to solve specific problems related to any industry. So in our climate, many of the researchers are concerned about their own survival and professional advancement. Therefore, research questions are posed in such a way as to elicit responses that are publishable in journals that are reckoned with for purposes of promotion. So you can hardly take such findings and turn them into innovation and ultimately to products. That's another point we need to note. Now, but you see, even within all of this, there's still a lot of room for hope, which is where the triple helix partnership becomes very germane. Because as you recall, looking at the engagement so far, we have certain targets. Following our interaction with the organized private sector, I think we identified some 7 elements, some of which would include how do we work together to convert universities from mere intellectual havens to innovation havens? How do we get our universities to conduct research that can translate into innovation? Even at the level of teaching and learning, how do we work with universities to ensure that we can convert teaching to industry practice through collaboration and partnership? So these are elements that we must take into account in discussing whatever potential benefits might arise from interactions between academia and industry. Now, so back to the issue of identification of star performance. This is global best practice, particularly within the context of budget constraints, funding constraints. You cannot spread yourself thinly and expect any impact. Therefore, it is common sense to assume that if you are able to identify, reward, and recognize champions, many universities do not have a preponderance of stars. They may just have a handful of stars who are shining from the perspective of making impact. So the same applies to institutions. There's no country that has all the universities at the same level of competence in all spheres of endeavor, in all sectors. So what we will be looking at, in line with our own blueprint and engagement with industry, is to use our knowledge of the Nigerian university system, for example. We know the good universities in medical research. As a matter of fact, we have centers of excellence in certain disciplines that are centers of excellence because they have proven, they have track records of performance and delivery in certain areas. So all we need to do is to see how to systematize the recognition of those stars, link them up with specific relevant industry that they can continue to engage with so that they can agree on some agenda from the research perspective that will be focusing on identified problems in each of these sectors of the economy. And you don't need a whole army to do that. You just need a group of dedicated, competent people who are supported with adequate funding and infrastructure to be able to work towards resolving some of these identified problems. So in my view, we need to, yes, learn from the global scenarios, but in terms of our context, we might, I think we're on the right track in this triple helix partnership. The various steps we have identified will be what we need to follow to say, how do we achieve those 7 elements that we identified after the retreat with captains of industry? We have this documented already. So how can industry help universities to refocus their research endeavors? And of course, industry itself will not just be refocusing from a theoretical perspective, but will be putting his money where his mouth is. So even those those who have research funding for R&D from their home countries, fine. But there are local issues that are begging for solutions. And these are the areas that I think we might wish to consider as low-hanging fruits as we go through this learning curve. There's a lot of room for optimism if we can follow through our own blueprints, agree on common research agendas at sectoral levels, and put our best foot forward all the time by harnessing resources from people. This is not the time to experiment, to do trial and error. We already have a few individuals that are, no funding agency, for example, gives money to a neophyte. You look for people who have demonstrated performance. And in our university system today, from the 172 universities, we have a few institutions that are already leaders in certain areas. In our case, whatever best practices we glean from Brazil, Finland, and everywhere, we still have to come back home to see how these lessons can be relevant to our own reality. And I think that's the entire purpose of this interaction between academia, industry. And of course, we also know that certain steps are already identified. Funding, you can talk from now till kingdom come. Once you don't have funding sources that are available, then you cannot go far. But in our own case, in our own triple helix arrangement, we have the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, which fortunately for us today is led by a research lover, so to speak, who understands the notion of impact of research and innovation on goods and services. So what we are working on right now, among other things, is to see how to get research proposals focused on specific sectors of the economy, identify problems that we can solve with tangible outcomes, and then we put our money where our mouth is. And if we start this way, we can, as a colleague mentioned, once we begin to recognize and reward contribution, you will motivate others to do the same. And of course, universities are not just about research. Our collaboration with industry is also in terms of how industry can support the students in our universities to ensure that they get training that is relevant to industry, so that going forward, we can obviate these claims that the students are unemployable. So if we work together through curriculum review and industrial attachment, then we can be talking about the common understanding of what skills are required, what gaps in skills exist, and how might we bridge those gaps. So these are the conversations and engagements that we need going forward, so that, having identified in our blueprint, for example, we identified 12 major challenges in the Nigerian education system. And we evolved 10 strategic goals from 2019-2023. So working through these steps, we are on the right path. All we need is collaboration within our institutions, collaboration between academia and industry, and international collaboration with partners in Brazil, Finland, and elsewhere, who can give us some lessons and support in various ways, technical and otherwise. So for me, this is the way to go. If we can take some of these steps and we show commitment, then we will be definitely home and dry within a reasonable time frame.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramon Yusuf. Let me come back to you with a follow-on question based on what I had asked previously. Some Nigerian universities have appointed deputy vice chancellors to be in charge of research and innovation and engagement. Is there a plan to sort of make that a system-wide possibility? Will NUC then be asking or preparing guidelines for universities? Because if we are looking at preparing the institution, then there has to be a structure for managing the process. I agree with you completely that beyond research, there is the question of practitioners getting involved in curriculum development, and also in terms of coming to the classroom as adjunct faculty. These are all possibilities. But at the institutional level, who will drive the proposition? Is there a plan to follow on those examples of institutions that have done that?
Yes, let me say that, you know, the way we are structured at the National Universities Commission is so that every major endeavor has a specialist directorate. Now, so talking about research, we do have a very vibrant directorate of research, innovation, and information technology, which I was privileged to head until recently. Now, so part of the activities, recent activities of that directorate has been to address the issue of research agenda. What is the research agenda in the Nigerian university system? Are there agendas for each sector of the economy? Is there a national agenda? So we have already had interactions with directors of research in our universities. We brought them to Abuja here and presented to them some draft document about our perception of what a research policy should be like at the institutional level. And of course, universities would normally have documents which are titled research policy. But the point here is there is a need to have some sync between institutional research agendas and the notion of a national research agenda. And the problem here is, for us at the university level, Engineer Mansour mentioned another component of our public research activities, which is in the ministries, the non-university based research institutions. Many people are aware that one of the greatest problems we have in Nigeria is the silo working arrangement among researchers. Even in the same institutions, there's hardly enough collaboration amongst researchers in the same institution, let alone collaborating with those in non-university based research institutions. And these are some of the things we're addressing in a global sense in terms of a national system of innovation. You can't have a national system of innovation where there are no handshakes between the various components. And our view at NUC is that this lack of collaboration robs Nigeria of the opportunities to leverage on synergies. Okay, if you look at the entire nation and the landscape of research and innovation, you will find out that you have scattered endeavors, all within the framework of what should have been our national research and innovation infrastructure, our national research and innovation pool. So we are depriving our taxpayers and ourselves of opportunities by not collaborating. So to answer your question, NUC coordinates and promotes these activities. The objective being that going forward, we have started working on the issue of a Nigerian university system research agenda. And you know, of course, that there is a National Research Foundation. It is expected that there should be some established relationship between defined institutional research agendas, because research agendas will be useless if they exist in vacuum. They have to exist within an ecosystem where there are linkages between the various systems. Okay, so it is from that level that NUC is now galvanizing action at the university level to say that there is a policy document, there is an agenda which will fit into a national research agenda. But let us not get carried away by all of these issues of documentation, because critically, we must mention the level of investment in research and development at the national level, starting from what percentage of our GDP is devoted to R&D, what percentage of our national budget is devoted to research or research and development. So, but for us, let's continue the work we are doing with putting our minds, our thoughts together to articulate a national research agenda. And then, of course, with the knowledge of the research assets, in other words, who are our champions in which fields? What other resources do we have for research and innovation across the system? When we have this compendium, which we're already working on now, we'll be in a better position to work out how to optimize the scarce resources we have for research and innovation.
Please allow me to come in here. I'm not letting you go easily. I have one more question before I go to the other panelists. You have referenced Professor Sulaiman Ogoro, the Executive Secretary of TEDFund, who I agree with you, is championing a deepening of the research and development culture and a move towards innovation in academia. So TEDFund recently mandated the establishment of, I think, research directorates in the university system.
Yes.
I am aware that before the establishment of the research directorates, I think it was NOTA that had established offices, technology transfer offices.
Yes.
Is there any handshake between NUC and NOTA? Is there, when NUC goes on visitation and those visits to universities to do quality assurance, does the activity of the TTOs, the technology transfer offices, do you monitor them as well?
Well, you see, the issue of research administration is critical to us because it may be recalled that NUC actually directed universities and encouraged them to set up research administration directorates. Because we observed that one of the reasons why our universities are unable to attract research funding from abroad especially is because we found out that there is no self-respecting funding agency that gives money to anybody in an institution that doesn't have a system or structure to ensure propitious use of those resources. So we took that first step, and I can tell you that at the last retreat with vice chancellors, we were able to gather data on the proportion of universities that have established research administration directorates. We actually do have guidelines which we drew up to help them understand what these research directorates should be doing, of course, including the technology and how patents may be managed. So yes, we in terms of our relationship with NOTAP, NOTAP has been on the forefront of intellectual property management, patents, and so on. So yes, we do have handshakes with them. You will also recall that for many years, NUC had established what we call the Nigerian Universities Research and Development Fair. And we put this fair in place to create an opportunity for universities to showcase their findings and invite industry. As you are well aware, Tope, we didn't achieve much by way of participation from industry until recently. And that is why we also resolved, after interaction with the organized private sector, that it may well be that we will bring our research fair to the next Nigerian Economic Summit. So now the point here is we do have some relationship with NOTAP. You will also recall that at some point we got people from NOTAP, and the general triple helix agreement was at play there. Yes, so we do have relationship with NOTAP, but we have a primary responsibility to galvanize quality research in the Nigerian university system towards establishing a direct nexus between all of those activities and with people in the private sector and other stakeholders. Ultimately, we'll be able to demonstrate greater relevance in terms of research activities in the universities and the national economic development.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramon Yusuf. Will, I'm coming to you next, but let me put something on the table for you to reflect on, Dr. Ramon Yusuf. Engineer Mansour, what I got from the substance of his comments was that industry players, even if they were to be interested, are often not involved at the beginning stages of the conversation. That by the time the researcher has produced a prototype, That's when it gets to them. And it may not be competitive for them to say they are going to take to the market. I've heard you say twice or so now that there is a conversation within academia for institutions to establish their research priorities prior to receiving funding and things like that. So as a takeaway, would it be appropriate, as that conversation is ongoing at a formative stage now, to invite industry to join the conversation in defining the problems from the outset, so that when you eventually bring the prototypes to the next fair, we won't have the complaint that industry didn't show interest because they feel it's not addressing the issues they have. So I think I'll leave that with you as a takeaway. Will, I want you to address something that Engineer Bansor said, and I think you are uniquely positioned to speak to that. He said even when the prototypes come, industry does not have the support. And I guess that means in terms of risk capital, because it's one thing to produce a prototype, it's another massive leg to then go through the hops of diffusing it into society. So it's just a question of risk. Is it a question of lack of government support? How do you think industry players can be motivated to invest in developing, taking beyond development and going the entire commercialization route? And how can we mitigate the risks in those ventures?
Okay, well, so a lot of super interesting points are coming out here, and it's I've got 5 pages of notes here of different ideas. So I think related to that, so you, of course, you're hitting a critical issue here. So in the triple helix, if for the model to work, everybody has to have shared objectives, right? And often industry, often they don't. So you have to find ways to align them. And the only way, of course, is through dialogue and organized dialogue with, let's say, kind of real action-oriented, kind of timelines to make things happen. A couple things that came to mind there are, so first of all, when a small background here is I set up, Finland created a new university in 2010 called Aalto University, which is the merger of the engineering, arts and business schools. So to the point that was made earlier, there were silos within the universities, but beyond that, there were huge silos between universities. So the approach in Finland, so what I love about the Finns is they're extremely pragmatic, and when they decide to do something, they just do it, and they make it happen. Actually, there's a great term in Finland that's called SISU, SISU, which basically is kind of it's their kind of dispassionate commitment to moving forward. That's probably the best way to put it. So what they did is they put these universities together and forced, the artists, the business people, and the engineers to get together. And it's taken 20 years to get it fully realized. But Tope, you visited our campus and saw what's evolving there. Turned into something very special. Now, to your point about, so in this university, largest in Finland, and one of probably the largest in terms of contract research with industry. And when I came in, I felt that it was clear that, it's not a brand new university, it was a merger of existing, but each universities, in particular, the engineering school, had very close relationships with particular firms, Finnish firms largely. And they were doing contract research for those firms. And so university was, departments were doing work, they were getting paid from on a kind of a contract basis. So the question is then, how do you, that's a plus. That's a good thing to happen. But as things evolve, you of course want some independency and ability to, you know, not only have your department serving a given company, but you want it serving society kind of writ large. So my mandate when I came in was to look at that and figure out how we create more kind of university-owned and exploitable intellectual property. And the way we did that was to kind of incentivize our leading professors. And again, it's come up across the board, but I think leading professors in terms of the ones who both exhibit excellent research, but also real impact, commercial impact, like licensing, patenting, you know, seeding startups, the ones that are actually at the top of those both piles. We had kind of lead our discussions with industries. So kind of creating, kind of communicating the best practices between the university and the companies that before had been served just as a one-to-one kind of one-off relationships. What evolved from that was something we called shocks, which was basically kind of partially industry, but also government funded consortia to attack specific problems, societal problems in a commercial way. And those entities were basically companies. They formed companies that were owned by, you know, could be 5 to 10 different companies, a university, a research institution, whatever. And that entity would undertake to a research program dedicated to solving a specific, let's say, a health related problem or a ecological related problem or whatever. So, and it was monitored closely. So, sometimes I think the participants thought it was too close, but at the end of the day, it did evolve into, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars worth of commercial output, meaning patents, licenses, and shared intellectual property across those companies. And I thought that was that was a catalyst. So that went on from maybe 2010 to 2015, or maybe it was 7 years, 2017. The next step now is they've kind of redoubled on the few sectors that were the most successful and are kind of pushing those forward. But the idea that, to your point, Tope, the dialogue is important, but the dialogue, again, I'll have to say, has to be amongst the leaders and the the ones that have seen success and kind of know what success looks like, as opposed to this really broad mishmash of people that are just sitting there taking notes and not really willing to lead. My last point before I'll yield here is I love the points also about the students. Finding student leadership there is fundamental, and I'll give you a few examples. We had a system to give very small grants to students who wanted to undertake innovation projects with, leading departments in the university. So generally, all the money went to the researchers and the professors, PhDs. We also kind of here tried to diversify, get a younger kind of grant recipient group, and that turned into huge economic, and that turned into billions of dollars of economic impact. Those early recipients of those very small grants, we're talking thousands, low tens of thousands of grants, have turned into some of the most successful businesses in Finland, and the people who did that are now the leaders. So I think identifying the change makers and finding ways to kind of facilitate them, get them to infect the rest of the community, super important.
Thank you for that, Will. Yes, I confess that Alto impressed me. I remember visiting the design factory, the startup center, and I think there was a research report, to your point, about involving students. There was a report on the impact of alumni-owned businesses, Alto alumni-owned businesses in the Expo area. And then they had a combined turnover of 500 million euro in 2017. That point, the fact that they've established leadership there. Thank you very much for that. So, Georgie, can I now have your take on
Sure.
the system?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear yeah, carry on, please.
I want you, you've had the perspective of the NUC in terms of the challenges and how, so if that mirrors some of the challenges you've had in Brazil, please speak to that. But again, you've also had Engineer Mansour say to us that most of the large companies here in Nigeria are subsidiaries of multinational firms. And that's why their research propositions and their research objectives are driven from their home offices. But I am aware that in Brazil, 400 out of the top 500 global 500 Fortune companies have research facilities in several Brazilian universities. They are still subsidiaries of those multinational entities, but they are conducting active research in Brazil. Some of these multinationals are present in Nigeria. They are also present in Brazil. I'm not going to mention names now. Why are they conducting research in Brazil while their subsidiaries in Nigeria are not involved in research activities locally? So when you talk to us about, and most of them are concentrated in the São Paulo area, so you could, if you can find one or two examples to tell us why that happens, why multinationals undertake research in Brazil, maybe we can learn a few lessons to start bringing them into the research space in Nigeria as well. They talk to us about the innovation ecosystem, and please speak to some of these issues that I've now raised. Thank you. Georgie, over to you.
Yeah, well, okay. Thank you for this guidance, because the conversation is very interesting. There are many ideas popping out and you know, like opportunities to expand. But one point that I want to start is like this. I liked what Arnold and also Cardwell mentioned in the beginning, is that nothing happens suddenly, okay? You have to move step by step. I'm talking about the ecosystem in Nigeria. You will not be competitive immediately. So you find niches, you find focus, and step by step you're moving. So you have to develop the institutions, the students, the researchers, and educate the industry, and also get commitment from the government. So it's all a balance of different actions that have to be taken step by step. Take the example of Brazil. The situation in São Paulo is very different from in some of the other places, okay? We are going through that process in other places here in Brazil as well. So it is a gradual advance, okay? So a couple of comments here. First of all, is nobody's fault just by themselves. For instance, it's not the government's fault, it's not the industry fault or the university's fault. Okay, so we cannot blame everything on the government or blame everything on the university. That's not fair. Okay, to have a balanced ecosystem, all the players have to understand their roles. Okay, so the governments have to be very clear on policies, on strategies, and setting priorities. And when I say government, there is the federal government and there is the provincial government. The priorities might not be the same. So they have to get in agreement, but that has to be clear for society, for industry, universities, and everybody else. It has to be clear. Here are the priorities for the nation. Here are the priorities for our province, And here are the priorities for this particular university. Okay, this is something that the government has to have very clear. Okay, and of course it has to provide some of the funds. Listen to this: some of the funds, not all the funds. At the university, we expect to have all the funds for us, okay? But it's not like that, okay? So the government provides some of the funds, some of the commitment. Then we come to industry. First of all, my opinion, Top, industry must understand that they do not have the monopoly of good ideas, okay? They tend to be arrogant, okay? But they have to, adjust their priorities according to the priorities established by the state, okay? They have to understand that, okay? Another thing, the industry must work with what they believe they are good at. Do not do something that you're not going to be competitive. Focus on something that you can be competitive. And that's something the industry can do, and they must understand that this is their role, okay? And they have to provide some of the funds as well, okay? So the government puts some of the funds, and industry also commits some of the funds. And then we come to the universities, okay? Well, universities must provide competent people, right? Talents. But for me, in bold, big, is competent and committed people, okay? They have to understand that the like I saw in some of the comments here, commitment to write papers, it's okay, but it doesn't really solve the problem, okay? So committed to deliver results, okay? In this ecosystem in which you have priorities set by the government, funds and assistance and partnership from the industry, and then we come with the talents, but they have to be committed. That's something that has to be put in the minds of young people, okay? They have to be committed. It's not like, bring everything to me. I'll give you some, but you deliver as well. And then understand, also university have to understand the same as industry. They do not have monopoly of good ideas, okay? They have to collaborate, they have to understand, and they have to discuss, okay? And then all the focus should be on delivering, okay? Research is difficult because you start from somewhere and you expect to reach a point, and you might reach some other point, some other place, but you have to go somewhere, okay? It's not just about writing papers. In terms of what we've been doing in Sao Paulo, I think it's important, the business of technology transfer and so on. I have a couple of examples of initiatives from the provincial government that were very successful. The first one is the PPP, public-private partnerships, okay? That's very interesting because it became a law, okay? And we have a very clear legislation about that. And so these rules for engagement between university research centers and private industry is there. The rules are very clear of what you put in and what you get out of it, okay? So that helps very much. So once you have a legislation about PPPs, the partnership between the different components of the triple helix becomes easier. So it has to start, you see, with some legislation, some action from the government. And the other one is concessions, okay, on against infrastructure investment. And a good example of that is the highway network in Sao Paulo. We have an excellent, it's not good, it's excellent highway network. Very little of it was built by the government. Most of it, especially the renovation and the extensions, are being built by the private sector, and is working very well. Okay, I exchanged that against a long-term concession, but at least I have excellent highways. Okay, other good examples is the high-tech industry. Okay, like you give incentives, you create programs, and you establish clear rules for funding, and you get a lot of input into high-tech. And the other big success we have here is the agribusiness, okay? That is an industry that's grown a lot, and they are extremely competitive worldwide, okay? And we keep on setting new goals and productivity targets, and also new technologies and so on. So these are three sectors that are developing very well. How are we achieving that here? There are several mechanisms that I want to mention. First of all, is a state or provincial level mechanism, which is the state collects a portion of the circulation tax, and that has to go to research and development. Okay, so we have a percentage of the tax that is removed from the account, the government account, and goes to a state, a provincial agency that takes care of research and agency. That works very well, as long as you don't have a crisis, an economic crisis, because when the tax goes down, our money goes down as well. Okay, but that's the way the game is played. Okay, and we also have another incentive at another couple of mechanisms that are very relevant here for São Paulo from the federal government. First of all is innovation incentives. We did an industry can deduct their income tax, their corporate income tax, against proven innovation projects or monies spent to make your own company more competitive. So think about that. The federal government is giving you a tax relief against becoming more competitive. That's very brave, okay? And the other one that perhaps is the most recent and also the most successful right now, which is establishing partnerships for innovation in which the money goes to the university. So we receive funds from the federal government to do innovation for the industry. So government pays 30%, industry pays 30%, and I employ my own people and my own facilities to become the other 33%, and then we build together an innovation project. That is becoming extremely, I'm talking about extremely successful. We have the money from the federal government, and we have to spend, because if I don't spend it, it will go somewhere else. So we need to find a way to relate with the industry, and we have to employ our own people to work for industry in the innovation, and that is working very well. So you see, we have state, provincial level tax funds, we have incentives from the federal government, and we also have innovation funds from the university, from the federal government within the university to develop projects. Everything that I said is okay as long as you deliver. Okay, a couple of comments here. This applies to all areas of knowledge. Whatever I told you about innovation and funds, incentives, and even R&D funds do not go only for technology, okay? They also go to social sciences and arts, okay? They're very careful with that, because we have to, and that's something important, because we want to be competitive in technology, but hey, hang on. It is a society. We need balanced skills, different views, and so on. So they're very careful with that, and that's something we have to, put effort to avoid the tendency to put all the monies into technology. So it has to be balanced, okay? And also we need to, to teach our, look, the young guys, like I saw a number of comments from the students and from universities and so on, saying, oh, wow, we have a lot of people getting into university and they don't find jobs afterwards, okay? So they have to understand, okay, that we are in the same game. It's not society giving them the privilege to go to university. Everybody is in the same game. So if employment is low, you have to teach people to think outside the box, to be entrepreneurs, okay? To be brave, to be innovative, to make things work, okay? It's not the solution, but at least they understand that they have to think differently, okay? And another comment that I saw is about it's from Dipo Lagunjo. He's saying that, okay, by building centers of excellence, we are building islands across the ecosystem. I agree. If we are limited to that, we will be having islands. But then this triple helix concept and this commitment from government, industry, and universities will build the necessary bridges. But that will not happen immediately. Like Arnold and Caldwell said earlier, it has to be step by step. Build. Let's start with, what about we start with the islands of excellence, and then at the same time we'll be building bridges along the way. That is the way I see it. Okay.
That's very interesting. So I'm going to call on Engineer Mansour now. I want to tie two things together. And I see a lot of similarity between what Giorgio just shared and what William shared previously in terms of, so how do we take these things to market? It's one thing to have a prototype, but how do we go the last mile? And it's interesting that from both a developed economy and a developing economy perspective, there are similarities in the approaches. So the thing that jumps out at me is this collaboration, this consortia type approach where government puts in parts of the money, the university sources parts of the money, and industry sources parts of the money. That means the risk is shared, it's distributed, it's not on one party alone, and it's tilted all going towards the objective of speaking to innovation. So, Engineer Mansour, how would you respond to these propositions, these examples from Finland and Brazil? Is it possible for us to bring industry to the table if they are not going to fund 100% of the total, and if it's in partnership, like setting up this consortia type approach with when you speak to that, I also want you to address something Dr. Ramon Yusuf had spoken about, and that is, yes, we complain about students being unemployable, but we have sideways, we have this and that. How can we get practitioners, and I'm speaking across sectors now, not just manufacturers, how can we get practitioners into the classroom to contribute? And how do we mobilize industry players in various sectors to join the curriculum development process? So those are three questions in one for you.
Thank you very much indeed. I would like to start from Dr. Ramon Yusuf's notion of the research agenda. I think we have to start from the agenda that we set ourselves. And I think in developing this research agenda, we must first of all align it with our overall economic policy, development policy objectives. Now, the theme of this webinar is indeed how to use research and development for diversification. Now, economic diversification, first of all, is a public policy. And therefore, by in fact aligning what we are now discussing with the public policy of economic diversification, we already have one clear trajectory that we all will be working on. The second is that apart from the economic policy, we also must, I think several people talked about prioritization, because obviously diversification cannot take place across the board overnight. And therefore we must prioritize those areas that offer us the best opportunities for achieving diversification. And I believe that it is in arriving at these priorities that, first of all, we have to define the ecosystem for collaboration between the various sectors. between government, between academia, and between industry. And setting priorities together, first of all, gives us the clear understanding that we are shared objectives. So if, for instance, we take the development of local content in, say, as part of the diversification agenda, and we look at specific sectors and identify in each sector what are the priorities for achieving local content development. And we agree between those operating in that sector, let's say the oil and, let's take the oil and gas industry. So, okay, in this sector, these are the priorities we set ourselves for achieving diversification. Basically, in this context, I think diversification means over time, reducing the dependence on imported items, whether it's material or technology, reducing dependence on imported skills and competences. So this, looking at it this way, gives us clear, if you like, definition of clear goals. And we can also actually make sure that we have clear timelines for this. Now, once we do that, then the question is, how do you motivate the various parties? Academia to focus on those areas, and industry to be able to contribute and indeed use the results of those developments, those research results in their own system. Now, I believe that it is in this regard that this triple helix arrangement comes to the fore. We have an agenda, we have clear priorities, and we have specific goals and targets in specific sectors. Let's take, for instance, our pharmaceutical sector. If we identify some areas of our pharmaceutical sector where we need to clearly develop local capacity or local content in terms of both materials inputs as well as actual human capacity, it makes it very easy to identify what academia should do in terms of what sort of research will they be doing in looking at inputs. How do we, for instance, substitute a particular imported material by something that is locally produced? Secondly, what skills do we need to build both in the universities and outside the university and industry to be able to rapidly develop that conversion, if you like. Thirdly, I then think it now becomes possible for academia and industry to sit down and develop specific research, what do you call it, research programs. And in those programs, it should be clear that the role of government is, first of all, one, to facilitate. Secondly, I think also there is the issue of regulation. Government must provide regulatory environments that support this relationship between academia and industry. If, for instance, we say we are going to convert the use of, say, imported wheat in our bakeries, in our bread making and so on, by using local, then it means academia and industry will be working together. Now, I think that means that the funding required for the university to do this research obviously can be shared in this way. First, government will produce obviously the startup and the key policy-oriented funding that's required. But industry can also pay in the context of ensuring that whatever result comes out and is being put into industry, and the process of converting from the research at the university into industry will not be a joint effort. But government will now have to take off the risks involved in industry. Because I think what stops industry from adopting a particular research program, research product, is indeed that there is a risk.
Yeah.
And therefore, if the government regulation and the incentive system can be set so that that particular risk is either removed or mitigated, then of course you can see industry making input you can see industry contributing to the funding of this research. And at any rate, you will see even competition within the industry moving towards who gets there first. And in fact, it is this competition as well as the incentive system that will provide the rapid support from industry into academia. Even that will also set some sort of competition within the academia. Even though I hear that yes, apart you need the academia to compete in moving research forward, but you need them to collaborate. So again, within that incentive system, you can support collaboration, you can support some level of competition. So I believe that this gives us an idea of how we can use the triple helix system to build first a clear trajectory for research and development in the universities and outside the universities if necessary, and for industrial development through very innovative regulation of the industrial process itself. For instance, if you create a system that you are encouraging your industry to use local raw materials, you must obviate or mitigate the risk, the competitive risk they stand, because obviously there are others that will bring in finished product that did not have to go through that costly development process. So that's what. The second is I think very apt. How do you now get not just the universities as institutions, but the students themselves? Now, again, what I'm proposing now creates an opportunity for students, not only the research work of students, but also for students training and capacity building. Because if we have a clear idea of a developmental process that has been agreed and is being jointly pushed forward or promoted by industry as well as academia, then students come in to do two things. First of all, it's going to be easier to move students into specific industrial settings where the particular research goal is being targeted. Again, for instance, if you take your chemistry student and you say, look, our target is to convert all our flour mills into using local raw materials, cassava or maize or whatever. And you can now have your students working in those industries that are involved in this transformation process. They will work in it in industry, so they know what are the key industry technical challenges that make this difficult, and they will work on the theory at their universities. And I can see even a process where the academicians, the teachers themselves, actually will start by spending time in industry. And thankfully, we have begun to discuss this with the committee of deans of engineering schools recently. And our intention is, first of all, to create opportunities for for lecturers to spend some time in industry so that they jointly identify research possibilities that will immediately have impact in the ongoing industrial activity that they are working on. And they can bring their students subsequently to fill in the actual, if you like, routine learning and capacity building that will need to take place. So clearly, this, again, we get back to this triple helix, requires this level of maybe 3 levels of engagement. First of all, at the policy making level, to set a clear research agenda and trajectory. Second, at the actual development of the research projects themselves, which need to be done jointly between industry representatives and academia representatives. And third, at the actual implementation, where the 3 students, lecturers, and industry operators are working together to actually put that idea, put that research idea into actual implementation. And I believe that, as Georgia said, this doesn't have to be only with regards to technology. It applies to technology very easily because but it can apply to anything. It can apply to basically human resource systems. We can look at today to say, look, what has this COVID experience highlighted to us in terms of how we manage our human resources? What can we do to improve the productivity of our people through improved human resources based on some of the lessons we have already learned as a result of COVID? And we can bring research university lecturers to sit with the human resource practitioners to identify some of these key issues, and then they go back and develop research projects that will now be pursued either at the lecturer level or even at the student level to build this implementation framework.
I hear you say something here, sir, that there's already a proposition ongoing, a discussion with the Committee of Deans of Engineering. And that's something that can be built on into a system-wide engagement. Yeah. I had a follow-up question for you, which you've packaged into your answer of this one, because I was going to then ask you to bring this home in terms of how do we, all these things we're hearing, how do we use it to address our need for economic diversification? But thank you, that was where you actually started from. So unlike other jurisdictions where possibly they started the conversation through the kind of industry exchanges you spoke about, where faculty would spend time maybe doing consulting work or learning. Ours, at this stage of our development, we need to focus on research that will create alternative options to the things we import. And through that process, we bring students into that proposition so their learning can be practical and dynamic. Thank you for bringing that forward. Arno, I'm coming to you now. You've had various contributions. You know the position in terms of how the university system is. You've heard what industry has to say, that, well, if we don't have to bear all the pain, if we don't have to bear the risk, we are happy to come into the proposition, we're happy to come to the table and start this process. Let's identify what the priorities are. There's a common agenda. Which areas are we focusing on? The common thread in all of the submissions is conversation and collaboration, ongoing conversation and collaboration. You've discussed with me before in a previous call about a need for a framework. So these discussions that we need to have, these ongoing conversations till we build the system gradually, where does this framework come in? Can it help us to midwife this conversation?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you very much. But maybe I'll build the framework in my answer, but maybe I can just start by that I think we need to see this conversation a lot broader than research. Nigeria is a great country, but if we talk about research, I don't think there's that many examples of very successful research commercialization. And if I now take that to any other context, if we talk about, let's say, Finland, or if we take the Netherlands, it's exactly the same. Research commercialization is not necessarily a thing that any university can do. It's nice that we talk about it, but unless you're doing pharmaceutical research or unless you have that 1 in a million shot, then not really. I think what we need to talk about is a rising tide lifts all boat, and we need to focus on funding excellence, but also starting at the bottom when it comes to funding our students and making sure that they have the right skills, that they have the right drive, that they have the mindset. Giorgio referred to the life skills and risks and fail, for example, and I think that's a key element when it comes to embedding our students with that particular mindset. And if I pick up the point from Engineer Mansour in terms of industry experience amongst our academics, I, again, also think that that is really important for academics to actually understand what industry wants. So if we talk about collaboration with industry, I think that's the right terminology, engagement, building relationship, but solely focusing on research and the commercialization of research, I think is misleading and will not give us the outcomes that we're looking for. I think what we need to do is we need to nurture those relationships, and that's where the framework comes in. So we need to see industry in from the maybe a more holistic perspective of the partnerships that we can build with them, and those don't solely and actually don't really reside in research. Those partnerships run across our education, they run across maybe the facilities that we have at the universities, or maybe the research infrastructure that we would like to have, and we can jointly invest in it. But nobody's going to make an investment after day one. We need to know each other, we need to trust each other, and we need to also understand that we, although have shared goals, our benefits that we gain from this are not necessarily the same, but they're not mutually exclusive either. So we can collaborate, because what the university gets out of this is employable students. They get research that can actually find its way into society, and industry gets access to that talent, and they get access to that research. And that's in the end what we want. We as a university want to make a social contribution. And I believe a framework allows us to better understand that. So it allows us to understand who are all the stakeholders that play a role here. So we have our students, we have our academics, we have our university leaders, and we have our industry partners, and then society. And it is important to understand all the different activities in which we can collaborate. And again, I can't stress this more enough, that it's beyond education. Maybe another thing I just briefly wanted to touch upon is the relation with government. I think we've heard a lot about government and funding and what government can do. But if we actually want to change, yes, government funding will help. Government direction in terms of their metrics and the funding that they can provide and their policies can help. But strategies are things that are documented. What really needs to happen is action, and action by the right people, action by the university leaders. William introduced the Aalto example. I think that's an excellent example, not only of merging a business and engineering and the design school and bringing all those competencies together, which has led to great student startups, but it's also an excellent example of university leadership, where leadership has taken a risk and has gone out of their way to make sure that they enable their academics to conduct the research that they wanted to, that provide a benefit to society, but also enabled their students. I think a nice example, for example, the student startup there, Catchbox. I still love the example. It's basically the three disciplines that came together: an engineer, a business student, and a design student, and they developed a really interesting product. We also talked about how to attract R&D. I think how to attract R&D doesn't start with look at all the research that we can do together. I think attracting R&D facilities first starts with having the right talent in your country to provide R&D facilities with the right talent in terms of both research, and not only in research excellence, but again, coming back to the entrepreneurial skills of those researchers. I saw a few comments in the chat when it came to, for example, getting stakeholders all on the same page. I've once heard the example of somebody in a university in Germany who basically locked the academics, university leaders, and industry in a room for half an hour and just make sure that they really talk to each other. Because this all starts with building personal relationships and understanding that we're all looking to do the same thing, right? Industry is looking to facilitate a job to the students. The students are looking for jobs or looking to build their own entities. And academics are, of course, very happy if their students find jobs. And again, still also research finds its way into society, but I don't think that that should be the starting point. Tope, you're muted. We can't hear you.
My apologies. I actually forgot to. I was very quickly, still with you very briefly now in a minute, because we have to now go to questions. What role will a framework play in this process of starting these conversations and continuing it? Where do we situate that framework?
I believe that a framework allows us to measure where we currently stand. It also allows all the stakeholders involved to understand what it is that we're actually talking about. Terminology and language are very important. And if we bring a framework in place, then we are all talking about the same activities with using the same terminology. And it also allows us to measure our activities in terms of input, activity, outputs, and the outcomes and the impact that we have on society. Because if we don't, yep.
Something that helps us to find common ground between the language industry speaks, the language academia speaks, the language of government, when it comes to this relationship and promoting innovation. Here is the common ground. We're speaking the same language. Thank you. And I want to apologize. I'm meant to have started taking questions 30 minutes ago, but I felt, based on the explanations, and fortunately, you are also seeing the comments, and some of you have addressed a few of the questions as they were coming on. But I have some questions that I'm going to throw at you now, based on specific requests from some of our viewers. My first question will go to Dr. Ramon Yusuf very quickly. It's from the Office of VCB UK. Do universities have databases of the research projects of their students over the years and provide access to the organized private sector, as this leads to innovation and for commercialization opportunities? Dr. Ramon Yusuf.
Well, the short answer is we are, as a system, grappling with the issue of data. Until recently, specifically until Professor Abubakar Rashid insisted on putting in place a system for getting reliable data. It was a big national problem. So the short answer is, yes, right now we're in the process of developing a compendium of research, thesis abstracts, research outputs, including research resources. Where are the centers of excellence? Who are the experts? What are the research topics? What are the outcomes? So that is a small project that is ongoing.
We're not there yet, but it's work in progress.
It's work in progress, yes. It's a very desirable objective.
This will speak to you. It's a tech-based question. Someone, I don't have the name, says a number of tech startups are changing the game in Nigeria. They've been changing the game in the last 5 years. How can we fold this into this wider engagement of building academia, industry, research, and as part of mainstreaming them into the national innovation system? And he says, especially given the rising millennial population that we have. What are your thoughts on this? From Technopolis experience.
Well, as also, I think, so first of all, it has to, the rise of tech startups is generally a millennial / Generation Z, although, there some of us from the boomer era are probably involved there as well. But I think integrating them into this discussions is super important. And the great thing about that's where the universities shine, I think, because that's, of course, that's where largely most of these guys are participating already. So as a university pulling together around really unique new use cases. So, some of it's technical, some of it's business models. I mean, it may be some of it's design. I mean, getting them kind of in and is a respected part of that discussion was for us, for Finland, which grew again from, I would say, a peripheral player in the innovation community to really one of the leaders. I would say the younger demographic had a lot to do with it. So, and a lot of those came straight out of the university. I don't have the exact statistics, but most of the fastest growing companies in Finland now are either started by people during or soon after university, or at least find most of their personnel there. So, and there's several actually, when I was kind of, I think maybe the most practical and insightful thing I would have there is the role of the university there has to be to give support, give facilities, give, some funding for, the concessions and things like this or whatever to get people together. Make sure that it's an open community. There's a lot of very good frameworks for thinking about this kind of startup communities, how to enable it. And yeah, just allow those guys to take leadership roles as well as those like us who are supposed to know better. I really felt that our community took off when we gave a lot more autonomy and leadership to the younger people. And again, I want to go back to one comment that's often been made. I think also scarcity is a good, often a positive. So frugalness and things like this. So, what I always like to see is people that would make some commitment based on really no, little or no funding in the beginning, come up with something interesting, and then, gradually enable them, but not to over invest in one project or individual in the beginning, and just see the colors that they show over time. We have a number of Nigerian nationals in our community here, and some of them have actually gone back to start companies there. I see the same kind of energy and resilience in that generation there as we have here.
All right.
If I can pick up on that, because William, I fully agree with what you're just saying. Like, it should start. A lot of these initiatives don't start with a tremendous amount of money, tremendous amount of funding. It all comes down to if they have the right people involved in a startup, and if you have the right people involved in driving a new initiative, either within or outside of the university, then that's all that it takes. It starts with having that right talent and having those right people in place, and it starts with a little bit of money. They don't necessarily need tons to start either a new, if it's a new company or a new initiative, a new research initiative. It's really important that you build from the ground up.
And maybe if I could just put one more, I think exactly, and it's about the opportunity costs. If you can just kind of cover the opportunity costs of the actor for some period of time, enough for them to show whether their idea has some merit. Again, we're talking about, for students, it's it's the amount of money that would keep them from taking a part-time job. So again, thinking down kind of at a granular level like this is really important.
Excellent. Giorgio, there's a question for you. Can you share with us the experience of the strong partnership between Petrobras and universities in Brazil? Very quickly.
Okay, yeah, well, Petrobras, 30 years ago, they had a big challenge to go into deep water, okay? To go offshore in deep waters, okay? And for that, they had to really be innovative. There was not lots of technology available anyway, and at that time the country was not very open for external technology. Okay, 30 years ago I'm talking about. By overcoming those difficulties and becoming a big producer of offshore oil in deep waters, they gained momentum and also a structure to collaborate back there 30 years ago. So when it came to the ultra deep offshore industry with the pre-salt, they already done it. Okay, so they had the network in place, they had the culture, and more than anything else, they had confidence. They've done it once and they did it again. Okay, so that is important. And when you mentioned, because that's Petrobras is Brazil, okay, but then you mentioned the multinationals. Why some of the multinationals have facilities here in Brazil, R&D facilities in Brazil, and they don't have any in Nigeria? My opinion, okay? These guys are there for the money, okay? They are not there for anything else. Their objective is to make money, okay? So what happens? It's not really the people's fault or the government's fault or university's fault, okay? It's a question of creating the conditions for them to see value in the collaboration. And that's our job, okay? I mean, it's our country's job. It's not the industry. We have to make the environment favorable for them to understand that they have benefits to invest in R&D.
Thank you very much. I was actually going to take you up on that to say, look, there's this question that's still hanging. The next question is also for you. How did Brazil engender the right mindset? How did you build the culture and environment for research excellence?
We're not there yet. We're still working on that. Like I mentioned what Arno and what Cardwell said, you don't get there suddenly. It's step by step, okay? So we are not completely there. We are improving. We are making people, young, especially young people, to understand that they have to be part of the system. It's not that everything is given to them as a present, okay? They have to be part of the system, and they have to be part of the effort to find solutions for whatever, okay? So when I mentioned teaching them to be entrepreneurs, to have their own ideas, to think outside the box, to understand what innovation is, the concept of innovation, young people that are listening to this transmission, okay? Innovation, by default, innovation is not something new. It's not an invention. Innovation is an invention that worked in the market, that worked for society. That is an innovation. So you might have good ideas, you might be good in inventing things, but you have to make them work. So when they discussed, again, Arno, I'm mentioning Arno and Cardwell because they are example for us as well, okay? They mentioned the culture of startups and so on, is to make people understand and believe that. And one last comment on this. Young people, directed to the young people again, your generation must take the sustainable development goals of the United Nations in your heart, okay? It's not something to be part of your objectives. It's not part to be part of your research. It has to be in the heart because that's the only way forward, okay? So if you do that little effort, you will see that a lot of funds are being directed not only for financial performance and market performance, but also environmental and social performance. So think about that. Incorporate that in your hearts during your education and put that forward in your careers, okay?
Thank you very much. There are a couple of other questions that I will quickly answer. Then I'm going to invite Engineer Mansour for a closing comment going forward. And that was, one was initially directed to NUC, but I think we discussed it already about allowing people from industry to come and become adjunct faculty and possibly take to lecturing after retirement. Yes, it is one of the pillars of the collaboration between academia and industry, and I believe NUC will roll out the guidelines on that process very soon. A gentleman also wanted to find out if we have any proof of concept yet for the triple helix engagement in Nigeria. Well, yes and no in a way. I think our first proof of concept was that we, the NESG and the NUC inked a partnership. There is collaboration. We had a retreat in the room. We've produced a report that gives a detailed outline, a roadmap of how we intend to implement the collaboration. So I guess where we need to go to now is to begin to show actual results from that collaboration. And the request was that we need to have quick wins, and I couldn't agree more. We do need to have quick wins. To all our panelists, please, although this is a virtual engagement, but we will be posing for a group photograph. They have instructed me to ask you that as soon as we are done with all the conversations, all of us will sit up and smile into the cameras so that the people at the back end can take our pictures. That's our group picture. I see Georgie is already doing that already. Engineer Mansour, can we have a closing comment from you, leading the charge. What commitments are you making on behalf of industry that we will take this forward, and if anything strikes you particularly, share it with us as we close. So I call on Nigerian Mansour to give us a closing comment. Okay. It looks like we have lost engineer. Okay, he's there. Engineer Mansour, if you are hearing me, I'm inviting you to give us a closing remark.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, thank you very much. I think Nigeria is overdue for a development process that brings together the capacities, not just in our university faculties, but also in our private sector, in government, in a way that moves this economy and this polity forward. And I do not see any other framework that will facilitate this rather than this kind of collaborative effort, working together to develop a trajectory for our economy, for our country, that will be based on the essential requirements for internalizing the development process. We have tremendous capacity of people. We have very highly intelligent people in Nigeria and abroad. And I believe that what we lack is a framework that brings out this capacity and mobilizes it for national development. And I think that the triple helix system provides us the environment as well as the framework under which we can mobilize our capacities, mobilize the intellect in our people, mobilize the huge skills in our young people that will ensure and engender the development of our country. I think I cannot say any more than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Mansour. And I want to say a very big thank you to all of you. I know you are all the way in Australia. This is way past midnight, but you did this for us. We're very grateful. Thank you very much. Will, it's a pleasure to see you once again. I look forward to us keeping the conversation going and doing some great work. Giorgio, thank you very much. We always have things to learn from you, and we share perspectives every time. And Brazil gives us an inspiration that we too can get there. Dr. Ramon Yusuf, we thank you on behalf of the private sector, and please extend our greetings to the Executive Secretary. We are appreciative of the hand of fellowship that he has extended to us, and we thank you, and we look forward to more positive and practical examples, and particularly to fast-tracking the things that need to be done for the good of our country. Engineer Mansour, brilliantly, you've captured what needs to be done, that we need to activate this triple helix principle, first and foremost, and that it is the collaboration between all the parties that will take us into that space of innovation, using this collaboration to drive and achieve economic diversification, where we can diversify our economy and build other areas where excellence can reign and we can create jobs for people. And to all the people who have taken the time to view this discussion, to take it in and be part of it, I apologize for the questions that we've not been able to take. I did think that we referred to some of them in the course of the conversation, but we thank you to say, to recap, the things that come out very quickly are that we must sustain this culture of collaboration, that we need to keep the conversations going on an ongoing basis, and that we must all speak to the same objective. We must have a set of priorities that bind us together. Government must take the lead in setting that agenda for economic diversification that industry and private sector can then buy into, and we could then share responsibilities. And in terms of implementation, it's clear from what we've heard That the examples that seem to work best are those where we're simply not chasing everybody for everything, but where we have a focus on identifying particular institutions and looking at the strength that they have, and then identifying the star performers in those institutions and building them up and supporting with funding and capacity building. It is clear as well that in our students, we need to cultivate an entrepreneurial mindset, which also speaks to the need to revamp the curriculum and bring it up to speed, and that we must involve students as in this process as part of the collaboration to give them practical illustrations and ensure they have experience going into the society. We will not miss creating frameworks to support the development of a startup culture, because the energy that is propelling growth in several economies are coming from the millennial generation. And if we support them, they will contribute value. We've also learned that we can bring the big players, the multinationals who are operating here, into R&D if only we incentivize them, not just them, the domestic players, the SMEs, that we need to incentivize people, that industry will require some risk mitigation strategies, and that a cost-sharing process can work for all of us. I believe we are recording this and we'll also transcribe it so that this can then form the basis of further conversations and action. As I said at the beginning, this is the first in a planned series of our innovation policy dialogues. Next week, we will have another one where we'll be talking about the broad concept of innovation to drive economic development. We'll simply be proceeding from this conversation and now going more in the policy-making direction. It is government that we will be speaking with at that stage. The other two that we will then hold in June are town hall sessions. We want to engage the legislators in the National Assembly, particularly those who are chairing committees on higher education, on science and technology, and on national planning, budget and national planning, because we've spoken about the need to work towards achieving the 1% of our GDP. So we will have a town hall with the leaders where we'll engage on the draft bill on the National Council on Research and Innovation. We will then hope to have another town hall where we'll talk about all of this in the economic sustainability agenda, which will speak to what Engineer Mansour had mentioned earlier, that we need to go to government and say, where are the priority areas? What are the key things that we are working towards, so we can begin to set targets and goals and timelines for achieving them. So we welcome the audience to join us in this journey as we work towards formalizing and developing a national innovation system for Nigeria. I thank you all as we close. My panelists, please remember we are now going to take a group picture, so please pose for the camera. Thank you to the audience, and we hope to see you at our other webinar sessions. Thank you all. So now let's have our picture.
All right.